Okay, so the Consumer Council for Water's your annual Water Matters survey reveals that I think fewer than ever households potentially believe that the amount water companies charge is fair, and trust is also at an all-time low. That's a slightly disappointing set of findings, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, look, you see the situation, overall trust in water companies as at that all-time low, and that's for the second year running. Uh, what is interesting with that result, though, is that the majority of individual companies actually improved their scores. And there really is this kind of growing divide between the best performers and the worst performers. So you see at one end of the spectrum, Wessex and Northumbrian were leading the way in terms of trust, and then it was Thames propping up the bottom. But the average is skewed by those people at the bottom. Had big falls this year. So there is some encouragement because 9 companies increased that score, and it shows that the dial can be moved on trust. It is concerning, as you opened with, that the people who think bills aren't fair has also hit an all-time low. It's just 53% of customers think what they are getting charged is fair. And again, it's the second, I think it's 3 years now in a row that has fallen. And what's really worrying is the fieldwork for this survey was done before the current bill increases that kicked in the 1st of April. So the survey was done before those bill increases hit people's pockets. So I wouldn't expect that score to be increasing the next time we run this survey.
Yeah, and in terms of how people have come up with these, I don't know if the survey uncovered this or just sort of anecdotally, any thoughts you have. I mean, clearly the press that the water industry gets is not desperately positive, and I guess Thames Water would be sort of dominating at the moment. But also, is there an issue where people dealing directly with the water companies, whether it's the billing or whatever, that they also, I suppose, what's the mix of how they become dissatisfied? Is it just because they read all these headlines saying the water companies are a shambles, or is it also because when they deal with the water companies, they feel sort of shortchanged, if you like?
Well, it's fair to say that the media spotlight is rarely off the water sector, whether it's pollutions of rivers and seas or scrutiny of executive bonuses. But there's not a week goes by without hearing something about those issues. But it's not just the media that's impacting people's perception of the water industry. It's people's lived experiences. It's what they see for themselves or what they hear from their neighbours. The water sector's issues weren't created by the media, although the media does amplify the message. I mean, we see poor performance in some key areas, particularly the environment being that driver for that dissatisfaction. And people are now, as we've just mentioned, paying more than ever before for their water bill, and they expect to see a good service in return. They expect to get help if they're struggling to afford their bill or if they need additional help. And if they don't see that coming, then that affects their satisfaction. So, what we see from the survey is general dissatisfaction towards water companies, but driven primarily by environmental performance.
Yeah, and in terms of the trust score being at an all-time low, how the situation's come about, I mean, have the water companies by and large sort of played by the rules that exist, but perhaps interpreted them in ways that weren't anticipated? Or is the sort of regulatory framework from government downwards, allowed these things to happen? I suppose whether it's blame or just who's responsible for this all-time low score. Is it purely the water companies have misbehaved, or should they have been held to account more by some or all of the regulators, for example?
Yeah, I mean, really good question, and it's a question that gets asked a lot about where does fault lie in all of this. I don't think it's fair to blame a single regulator or a single government or a single water company or all the water companies for this loss of trust. I think it's been a collective failure, and I think it's important that as a sector we recognize that, because we're going to have to really focus to turn this around, to rebuild that trust that is so important in water companies. So I think instead of like pointing fingers, we should be pointing to solutions which can help build that trust and restore confidence in the water sector. And again, there isn't, it's not one thing that's gonna solve this. It's going to be a bunch of things that's going to slowly help rebuild trust. I mean, we're seeing this new government or newish government addressing some of the things that people want to see changed. You know, we've just recently seen that regulators have the power to ban unjustified executive bonuses. And we've also seen some changes that we're particularly pleased about, which is changes to the protections in terms of the guaranteed standards of service scheme. So this is payments when things go wrong that people get. So if you have a supply interruption, for example, or low pressure, you get a payment. Those hadn't been updated in decades. So we've been pressing for these to be updated, and we proposed changes. And the new government that came in last July very quickly consulted on those changes, and they're going to happen. And that's really positive, but it needs to take a whole bunch of these smaller things that collectively could make a difference. And overall, the sector just needs to be far more transparent about how they operate, and more directly accountable to the communities that they serve. And I think if you start getting those elements right, then that's a good solid basis to try and rebuild that fractured trust.
But I guess, as you say, there's been bill increases and there are more sort of flagged up. So perhaps the bad news is that this current situation might not improve if people think their bills are increasing even more unjustifiably. But maybe on the plus side, there is a lot of good work planned. There's a lot of investment and a lot of infrastructure projects out there. So do you think the water companies can sort of justify these increases, as you say, by being more transparent and telling people of all the excellent things that they are planning to do? Or do you think people will just see, oh, my bill's gone up by this. These people are, I have even less trust in them than I did last year, if that's possible. But no.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on, I think, the answer there, that I think companies need to double down on their efforts to explain to people where their money is going. People don't want to feel like they're being ripped off. They want to feel like they're getting great value. So by explaining what's going on, how their money's spent, ideally doing that in a way that explains it in a relatable way, so either the direct services they receive or some big investment in their local area, that can really help, I think. But fundamentally, people do accept the need for bill rises, and we tested companies' business plans with consumers for every single water company in England and Wales, and it was around 3/4 of the people surveyed actually found the plans acceptable in terms of the plans to improve services and to improve environmental performance. So actually, there is a desire out there amongst consumers for investment to be made and for services to get better. So that makes it all more important, though, that companies explain, yes, you've wanted these things, and this is where your money is going to go. And fundamentally, if people notice a difference, then that gives companies a chance to change their customers' opinions. Why would you change your opinion of your water company if you didn't notice a difference? So it's really important that the water companies explain where people's money goes, deliver those improvements, and then I would say keep explaining, so that people go, I see, I have actually noticed a difference, whether it's investment scheme or through better support if they need extra help. And I think that's part of that recipe to help rebuild trust.
And I mean, do you think it would be at all helpful as well for the industry, maybe collectively, to sort of hold its hands up to a certain extent and say, we have taken our eye off the ball for whatever reason, and we are from this point forwards, determined to do many of those things you've outlined. Would that be helpful at all? Because I think a lot of people think they sort of double down. I mean, again, the Thames Water example, where I think they were trying to put some kind of bonus scheme in with the rescue package, and it turns out that maybe wasn't required as was etc. So there's quite a lot of sort of smoke and mirrors, perhaps people think, going on, as opposed to the water company saying, yes, we've got it wrong, and from now on, you can trust us more because this is our direction of travel. Or is that not particularly helpful?
I think that would be helpful. I think Water UK, and I don't want to speak for them, but I'm sure they would say, "Oh, we did apologise a few years ago." I think they apologised for being too slow to respond to public opinion on the environment. I mean, that apology framed in that way didn't go down that well with customers, because the punchline was, and therefore we're going to invest billions of your money to sort it. So it's kind of like, I don't think that apology was framed in quite the right way to land well with customers. I do think that the whole sector eating a bit of humble pie and saying collectively we've not got it right, and we collectively want to make it better would be a helpful message to hear. And I'm deliberately using the term the sector there, because I'm including within the water sector not just water companies. I'm including Ofwat, EA, us, the wider sector. And I think the wider sector could do with that reset. And I think saying that publicly would help, I think, to restore trust, because it shows that we're listening, we're showing a bit of humility, and passionate about what we do. I want to see a sector where customers go, do you know what? I really trust these companies. I see them providing an essential service that I cannot live without. Our economy relies on it, the environment relies on it, and they're good custodians of the natural environment. Now, we're quite far away from a world where that's what people are saying, but we should be striving for that, and we should be relentlessly focusing on that, because that's where we want to be. And there's no reason, given time and effort, that you couldn't get to that place.
And in terms of I mean, we talk about it as the water industry, but as you highlighted earlier on, there are lots of different water companies at, shall we say, slightly different stages when it comes to their journeys, and also, trust levels and stuff. Do you think there is a very wide disparity between the best and the worst performers? And if there are, can you identify clear reasons? Is it because they do focus on the shareholders and that sort of thing, far more than they should do? Or just, I suppose your thoughts, as to the differences between some of the water companies, and if there are any sort of common reasons as to why they would be there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you look at the Water Matters Tracker Survey and you look at what the data's saying, there is quite a disparity between the best and the worst companies in terms of perception. And you're talking double digit, sometimes 20% difference in how people's views differ between companies. So there clearly are things that some companies are doing well that other companies are not doing. And when you look at the better companies, you see that they are providing a really good core service. And by doing that, obviously, that means that you're going to get less people phoning it up or writing in to complain. But you also see that when people do complain for those companies, those complaints are handled well, and that they're dealt with quickly. So they're even doing a good job at turning around bad situations too. So good core service, turning around bad situations, and really being customer focused. And I do think this touches on what is the sector here to do. What's the primary reason of the water sector? Why does it exist? And it exists to provide an essential service. That's what it exists to do. It doesn't exist primarily to give a tidy return to shareholders. Now, we've got a model that is private companies running the water sector. So clearly a well-run company should be able to turn a fair profit. Now, that's a whole different debate about how much is a fair profit, but you can see that in the past, clearly that some levels of profit is beyond the pale, and for a low risk sector where you don't have to win your customers. But I think the better companies do remain focused on their customers and understand what they're here for. And I think that is absolutely critical for all the companies and every player in the sector, everyone, to understand what are we here for? Why are we doing this? And we should just never forget we were providing that essential service that everyone relies on. And water companies are custodians of the natural environment. They rely on the environment as their source material, and they put water back safely into the environment. And if you don't do that right, you are behaving unsustainably in the long term. And again, lose sight of that, and we're in all sorts of trouble.
And maybe, I mean, in finishing, do you think the current model, with all its faults, is rescuable, or do you think it would be helpful, bearing in mind, the results of your survey and just the general, shall we say, low opinion there is of the water sector? Would it be helpful maybe to sort of start again and come up with some new regulatory frameworks, and try and reframe the sort of the rules for the water companies, etc.? Or do you think that would be an expensive and unnecessary exercise? Is what we've got, fit for purpose if it's better run, shall we say, by all the different folks, or do you think it would be good to maybe just draw a line under it and say, right, we're going to come up with a completely new framework over the next 2-3 years, and from then on, that's how we're going to work the industry?
Well, it's a very timely question, given that we are imminently going to hear from the Water Commission and get the findings from what Sir John Cunliffe has to say. So, I think everyone in the sector is waiting with bated breath for the outcomes of the Water Commission. I mean, we are really looking forward to actually seeing what Sir John and his team have to say, because this is an opportunity. I mean, it has been framed as a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity to set this new direction for the sector, and I think that's right, because you can't just do these big reviews. You could do one every year, could you? That would be ridiculous. But actually, it's now feels like the right time to have that look at it, a really close look at the sector and how it operates. I mean, we have said in our response to the commission that with changes and some surgery, the current system could work, and that's not to mean that it'd be easy to do, or it's straightforward, but I don't think you need to rip it up and completely start again, because I think that would be, you'd run the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater by doing that. So absolutely change is necessary, a refocusing on what really matters, a greater clarity on the objectives of all the different organizations that play a part in water. So getting rid of some of the duplication that exists between the different organizations, and complexity as well. Then the number of plans that exist that water companies have to follow and abide by, and that all flows into a price review. It's incredibly complex, and what we've seen at this price review and in the past as well, those plans can kind of get out of sync. So you've not quite finished your water resource management plan or had it signed off before the price review is concluded. Or this time we saw the WINEP, the Natural Environment Programme. Things were still being added to that after draft determinations, which it's not. It's all become a bit. It's out of sync. It's a bit messy. It's a bit wobbly. It needs to be refocused, and I think that way we'll be giving ourselves the best chance at creating a sector that can deliver the things that we want. So we're really much, and we also clearly want to see good customer representation in that, a sector that listens to people and responds to the priorities. Because at the end of the day, it's you and I, it's all of us who are paying for these for services, and It's for a monopoly sector to maintain its legitimacy, it has to show that it is respecting their customers. It's got a good culture which is focused on customers and is listening and responding to their needs. So I think those strands and pulling those strands together in terms of what comes out of Cunliffe, the Cunliffe review, I think would be a really good start to set a better direction for the sector. But as I say, you don't need to rip everything up and start again to do that.
But would you hope that the findings are fairly prescriptive in the sense that a lot of the interested parties, if you like, in the water ecosystem have potentially conflicting views? I mean, for example, the house building sector theoretically wants to maximize its profits, and therefore it, rightly or wrongly might consider that SUDs and various other, water conservation measures, installing them as they build houses are costing the money, which could affect their profits. Do you think you need government to get sort of granular to that level to start telling all the then farmers with all this runoff pollution, which the water companies then say, well, it's unfair that we have to deal with that? Do you think it needs to get to that level of sort of telling people in each sector part of what is and isn't acceptable, or can it be less sort of specific, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, I really like that question because you're hitting on some of the key issues that we've got at the moment with conflicting needs, conflicting priorities, and I know your question. You obviously asked about how granular and specific. I would, in answering your question, I say it's probably not the level of granularity that's needed. It's strong leadership that's needed, so that it's crystal clear what it is we need to do as a sector and what it is that's important with that long term in mind. So I hope that makes sense rather than the level of granularity. And I'll give you an example of what I'm on about. The water sector is at the forefront of climate change, of fighting climate change. You think about it, droughts, floods, wildfires, and then all the runoff washes into rivers can make water resources unusable. So think of the things we've seen in the last few years. 2022, when we hit 40 degrees for the first time, there was something ridiculous, like a 500% increase in calls to the fire brigade about wildfires that summer. The water sector is seeing the impacts of climate change firsthand. This isn't just something that's on the horizon anymore. And I think we need to be very honest about this and say, this is a massive challenge for this sector. I mean, arguably, I think it's only insurance sector that has the biggest exposure to climate risks. So not about low carbon, I'm talking about extreme weather and that kind of thing. And I think we need to be crystal clear, and this is why strong leadership is needed, to say, if we want to be able to have a sector that is sustainable and can cope with all these challenges, this is what needs to happen. And let's not build houses on floodplains. Let's make sure we put sustainable drainage in place. So I think actually listening to my own answer, I think I'm agreeing with you as well. I'm saying we need strong leadership, and we probably need a level of granularity where it's crystal clear what needs to be done. I mean, I don't think it shouldn't necessarily be micromanaged from the top, but we need to be crystal clear about the challenges and what interventions need to be put in place to manage those challenges. Because if we don't, we will be letting down consumers. We'll be letting ourselves down as a sector. It's full of professionals that want to do a fantastic job. And I'm sure many of them are frustrated. They're feeling hamstrung that they can't do the job that they want to do. So I think with that leadership and clarity that comes out of the Water Commission, I think that would be, I think that leadership and clarity is absolutely necessary for this sector to thrive into the future.
Yeah, and therefore, I mean, maybe just finally, do you think it's for government to sort of explain to folks, as you said, climate change? I mean, the predictions are fairly dire if we don't, build new water resources, etc. But obviously, if the water companies are seen to raise the bills and people just moan about that, but if they buy into this vision, which is a bit daunting, that, as you say, floods are increasing, drier summers, etc. So the government is the one that needs to explain what is going to happen if nothing, no action taken, therefore what needs to happen, and then there'll be more acceptance all the way down to get on with the necessary work. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think we need that leadership and vision from the top about what does it mean to become climate resilient and what does that mean for this water sector. I think you need that, but we also need, and this just picks up on the threads. I mean, it's a good way of tying this all together, because actually, I think then the companies need to explain, okay, with that context, what are we doing about it? And explaining that really clearly is important, because part of the mix, particularly in balancing supply and demand, is that consumers will have to reduce their own personal consumption as well. And we know that people are more likely to do their bit in reducing their personal consumption if they understand the bit that the company's doing too. You know, you'll do your bit, I'll do my bit. It's kind of, yeah, there's a balance there, right? So if companies explain what they're doing to cope with the future challenges, that not only makes bill increases more palatable, but also increases the chances that consumers will play their part in helping to reduce consumption, and also play their part in not misusing sewers. So they're flushing the right things down the loo, basically, because that's important too. Because if you think about it, more blockages in the sewers will have a bigger impact if you've got more extreme rainfall. The blockage will cause a bigger impact, and I think that aspect of coping with future changes to weather isn't talked about enough. Actually, let's use our sewers properly. I mean, we touched on suds, but let's keep surface water out of sewers, but also let's not misuse our sewers. So there is a consumer role in all of this. And I think it's important. We're the consumer body. We're not just sitting here saying, oh, it's for the sector to do it and consumers don't play any part in that. Consumers do play an important part. We want people to pay their bills, be good payers. We want consumers to get good support from their companies if they need extra help. And we also want consumers to play their part in helping to meet the challenges, whether it's not misusing sewers or being careful about their personal consumption. And given the bill increases, that's also another motivation, because they can save money too. So I think this really all stems from is leadership at all the right levels and clarity about those challenges and what needs to be done about them. And I think that's vital for the sector.
Okay, I mean, it's been brilliant to chat, Mike, and some fascinating insights into obviously the survey itself, but then more generally about the industry and your thoughts. So really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.